Listener discretion advised. This psychological horror story is intended for mature audiences and contains themes of abduction and abuse that may be unsettling for some listeners. This content does not endorse or glorify violence or real-life harm in any form. Please listen responsibly and prioritize your comfort.
I was kidnapped by a man who thought he could keep me forever. I never thought I would be able to do what I did to escape. You don't get to decide how your life changes. Not really, anyway. You can't plan or prepare for it. One minute everything feels normal, almost boring, and then, in an instant, it's gone. Just like that, your world, your safety, and the sense of control you thought you had all vanish into thin air. My name is Emily. I'm writing this because I don't want anyone else to fall into the same trap I did. It seems that you can't show any compassion anymore, or else it ends up biting you. I know I'm supposed to be thankful that I made it out alive, and I am. But sometimes every part of me feels like I'm still back there, stuck in that place. I need to get this off my chest, and more importantly, out of my mind. Who knows, maybe my story will help somebody out there. Don't think you're safe just because it's a nice day or because you're walking in a familiar neighborhood. That's how it always starts. If you've watched enough crime documentaries as I have, you know they begin with something small, something so unremarkable that it almost feels weird to call it the beginning. I was too naive to see it at the time, and that nearly cost me my life. It was a typical Thursday in Eastern Virginia. I had been working my ass off trying to finish my online degree, so I thought I would get out and take a walk across town. I figured the fresh air would do me some good. That afternoon felt calm and ordinary, just like any other day. I admired the first signs of fall beginning to show along the path. Sunlight warmed the cracked pavement while red and orange leaves drifted down, crunching under my steps. My mind wandered, free from any concern. I started to think about what I wanted to do for dinner. I thought about making something simple like pasta or even picking up a pizza. There was no rush. The town was quiet and still, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of a leaf blower in the crisp autumn air. I wasn't on alert. I didn't think I needed to be. Looking back, I still wonder if things would have turned out differently if I had been walking by that spot 5 minutes earlier or later. Perhaps things would have turned out differently, and I wouldn't be sharing this story with you. I almost stopped at the corner store for a soda but kept walking, telling myself I didn't need the empty calories. As I moved on, the warm scent of cinnamon filled the air, followed by something else. The smell was so tantalizing that it immediately piqued my curiosity. Glancing over the fence that separated the store from the yard behind it, I spotted the source of the wonderful smell. It was Mrs. Landry's house. There on the windowsill of her kitchen sat 3 perfectly crafted pies, each releasing the mouth-watering scent of apples and spice. I closed my eyes, letting the fragrance wash over me, and for a moment I thought to myself that this could nearly be the perfect day. It wasn't just close to it, it was perfect, until I heard the hum of a car approaching from behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was just another car passing by, likely another stranger in a hurry, probably heading home from work or squeezing in a few errands before dark. Just as I had pushed it to the back of my mind, I heard the engine ease back. The brakes gave a sharp, brief screech as the car slowed to a near stop beside me. I should have just kept walking, pretending I hadn't noticed. Instead, I stopped and turned as the car came to a final, sharp halt next to me. The car didn't look like much at first, just a beat-up old sedan from the late 90s or early 2000s. It was the kind you stop noticing after seeing 1,000 of them. But the longer I looked, the stranger and more out of place it felt. The fatting gray paint was chipped and scabbed over with rust, worn down by years of neglect. A fresh dent marred the front bumper, sharp and out of place, as if it had struck something recently. The windows were tinted just enough to hide whoever was inside, though the driver's side was slightly cracked open, as if the air within had grown too thick for them to breathe. The tires were mismatched and worn nearly bald, yet somehow still holding together under the car's weight. The headlights were dim, emitting a sickly yellow glow that flickered every few seconds, like they were struggling to stay lit. Even the engine sputtered unevenly, with each dying cough sounding like it was fighting for its last breath. As I studied the strange car, the passenger window suddenly jerked to life, grinding and squealing as it inched its way down. It finally came to a stop, leaving a narrow opening into the dark, stale interior. From the shadowed gap, the upper half of the driver slowly came into view. Curious as to what they wanted, I hesitantly leaned toward the cracked window, trying to get a look at the person behind the wheel. A dark silhouette of a man emerged, leaning toward me across the passenger's seat. From the looks of him, I guessed that he was a middle-aged man, maybe 40 or 50, with long, greasy black hair slicked back across his scalp, like he hadn't washed in months. His face was gaunt and unnervingly pale, as if he hadn't stepped into sunlight in years. His skin looked almost artificial, like Halloween makeup left on for way too long. He tilted his head downward, his gaze dropping until our eyes met. Up until that moment, I hadn't been especially cautious, but the instant I looked into his eyes, fear struck me like a hammer on cold steel. They weren't dark or light, but more so empty, strangely vacant, like they shouldn't belong to a real person. He stared at me, wide-eyed and unblinking, studying me as intensely as I was him. After a few agonizing seconds, he smiled. This seemingly friendly gesture unnerved me even more. It wasn't the kind of polite smile you'd give a stranger you just met on the street. It was too wide, too eager. His lips curled around his face, stretching so far that it seemed they might tear at the corners, stopping just short of it. It was as if he was trying to mask something behind the bizarre display, something that he didn't want me to see. "You need a ride?" he asked, his voice smooth, almost pleasant. If it weren't for how sharp my senses had become, I might have considered him to be a nice guy just trying to help me out, but something about him put me on edge. I could physically feel my skin crawling under my jacket, the sound of his voice, the way his mouth moved when he spoke, the car he drove. It all screamed danger in my head, but I foolishly gave him the benefit of the doubt. I hesitated for a moment. It wasn't like me talking to strangers, let alone getting into a car with one. Something about that moment held me in place. I was speechless, but my mind wouldn't slow down. It felt like I was stuck in a bubble with this guy. And though I couldn't name the feeling, it clawed at me deep from within my gut, telling me something was wrong here. "No," I said quickly, shaking my head, hoping that would be enough. He didn't move. He just kept staring at me, smile never faltering. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm not going that far, just a little drive. I can take you wherever you need to go on the way." I could feel my heart thundering in my chest. There was something so fundamentally and disturbingly wrong with this situation that I had begun to plead with myself to leave. Why I chose to continue standing there will forever haunt and confuse me. One part of my brain clung to caution, urging me to run or get away in whatever way possible. The other part, the curious side, was unfortunately the one winning the battle. My feet remained glued to the sidewalk, and I just stood there, staring back at his lifeless eyes. I should have run or done something, but I just stood there. Instead of doing the obvious thing, I chose to respond to him. "No, I'm fine, really," I said, my voice cracked with nervousness. His bizarre grin fell for the briefest moment, as if he were disappointed, but quickly returned before I could even blink, stretching even wider as if he were forcing it. "Come on," he pressed. "I'm not a bad guy. It'll just be a short ride, no harm in it. You look like you could use a break anyhow." There was a part of me, a part that I hate now, that felt compelled to respond. As stupid as it sounds, it insisted that I remain polite, as if I owed him an answer. Swallowing my growing fear, I spoke. "I'm fine," I said again, trying my best to make my voice as confident and intimidating as I could, though inside I was anything but. I took a step backward, my feet moving almost instinctually. He didn't flinch from my act. He just sat there with his eyes locked onto mine. It felt like I was caught in a starring contest, the stakes of which were getting higher by the second. For a moment, a deafening silence settled between us, only broken by the soft click of the passenger door unlocking. It was barely louder than a whisper, but it was enough to send me into pure panic. My heart jumped in my chest, and my body froze solidly in place. The door creaked open as he pushed it outward, revealing the torn, ragged seat inside. "Please," he said softly, his voice unnervingly calm, "I just want to help you." It was like he was trying to coax a frightened animal into approaching him, pressing ever so gently, seeing what he could get away with. Looking back, I could strangle myself for not just running away, or yelling, or doing something other than standing there. Instead, I decided to do something I had never done before and haven't done again since. I chose to stand my ground, hoping that seeing me push back would deter him. I took another step back, trying to slow my spinning mind. My breathing quickened, and my hands began to tremble as I planted myself on the sidewalk. I had seen this type of stuff in TV shows, but I never thought I would ever have to live it. My resolve crumbled in an instant, replaced by suffocating panic. One moment I was telling myself to stand my ground, but it was quickly washed away by my overwhelming instinct telling me to run. I quickly turned, tensing my calves for a push-off down the street. I planned to run as fast as I could, yelling as loudly as I could until I reached the corner store, where I knew I would be safe. Before I could make another move, I heard his voice tear through the air, booming in my ears. "Don't make me chase you," he snarled with gritted teeth. He now stood outside his car, staring at me with the cold focus of a predator daring its prey to run. I froze, my brain stifling any urge I had to move. Time seemed to slow down dramatically. Seconds felt like hours as his words swirled around my mind. The looming threat of what would happen to me if I tried to run held me firmly in place. Maybe it was the fear, or the way his words clung to my mind, but I couldn't move. I forced myself to look into his eyes again, desperately searching for some small glint of weakness, anything to assure me that he wasn't going to hurt me. What I saw instead made my stomach turn. This wasn't just a man in a car. He wasn't just a stranger asking for company. This was something else entirely. There was something in his eyes, something deep that I couldn't place, but it told me with a chilling certainty I would die if I tried to run. Before I could even register it, he had lunged around the back of the car and was quickly running toward me. By the time I reacted, he was already stepping onto the sidewalk. I ran back toward the corner store as fast as I could. I could hear his shoes slapping the pavement as he chased me, gaining on me with each frantic step. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could get a sound out, his hand shot out in front of me, covering my nose and mouth with a thick white rag. A sharp chemical smell filled my nose, stinging my sinuses. I tried to pull away, but his hands held it tightly to my face. "Let go of me," I shouted, my voice muffled to nearly nothing by the rag. I kicked and thrashed, but his grip was like iron. His fingers dug into my ribs and arms, and his body pressed against me as he yanked me backwards, dragging me down the street and shoving me into the passenger seat. "You're going to be fine," he whispered in my ear, his breath hot against my neck. "I'm going to take you to a safe place." The thick, noxious scent flooded my throat, choking me from the inside out. I tried to fight it with everything I had, knowing that if he got me into the car, I was done for. Though I gave everything I had, my muscles betrayed me, losing strength almost immediately as he pushed me onto the seat. The next few moments were a blur. My vision spun around me like a vortex, faster and faster, until everything began to tilt and dim. The world shrank to fragments, slowly retreating, giving way to blackness. I could feel his ragged, eager breathing on my neck as the sound of the car's dying engine filled my ears, followed by the echoing thud of the passenger door closing behind him. The dark shape of his face hovered above mine, grinning down on me as my vision faded further. My eyes rolled back, barely holding focus. I caught a glimpse of something metallic in his hand as my head rolled around the headrest. The world smeared into streaks, blurring into a mixture of light and dark. I tried with everything I had left to push myself away, but the darkness rushed up too fast, pulling me down with it. As my vision fell to black, I felt cold, sharp metal pushing into my throat. "Go to sleep now. I don't need any surprises," he said, his words warbling in my ears as my body finally gave into a deep, paralyzing sleep. When I finally awoke, it wasn't gentle. It was violent and sudden as my consciousness snapped back into reality. Air rushed into my lungs in a single, desperate gasp. It felt like I'd been hit by a truck. I struggled to breathe, scrambling to keep pace with my panicked thoughts. My body felt heavy, as if some invisible force were pinning me down. For a moment I thought I was still in the car, but as my senses slowly returned, I could see that this situation was far worse. I was in a basement, or at least that's what it felt like. The place was incredibly dark, almost pitch black. The only light came from a single bulb dangling overhead, flickering as if it were barely getting any power. I blinked hard, trying to clear the haze from my vision. When I tried lifting my hand to rub my eyes, something jerked it back down, stopping it about a foot from my face. I looked down to see what had caught me, still blinking away the haze. I could see something blurry and indistinguishable wrapped around my wrist. I looked down at my other hand, noticing that it was caught in the same way. As my vision sharpened, the blurry shapes resolved, and the realization hit me, sending a fresh surge of panic through my already tattered mind. My wrists were shackled with heavy chains. Thick iron links held me fast against the brick wall at my back. The metal pulled so tight it cut into my skin, crushing any chance I thought I had of breaking free. I yanked and struggled anyway, desperate and shaking, only to feel the chains bite down harder. With each attempt, the unforgiving metal bit down, tearing off strips of skin, leaving thin streams of blood trailing down the brick and onto the cold concrete floor. I eventually stopped fighting, letting the chains go slack as I tried to conserve what little energy I had left. I rested my head against the cold brick, feeling the adrenaline drain away and my senses creeping back one by one. That's when the smell hit me. A putrid, rotting stench permeated the air, heavy with mildew and a dampness that clung to everything, including my skin. It crawled up the back of my throat, forcing me to gag, but I swallowed it down, not daring to make a sound. I had no idea where I was or whether he was still nearby, but I wasn't going to give him a reason to come back. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, I was alone for now. Swallowing back the intense urge to vomit, I let my eyes drift across the room, scanning every fetid inch of the place. I noticed a slot in the wall next to me. The doors were made of metal, rusted and weathered by time, but they seemed as though they had been used recently. It wasn't large, maybe only concealing a foot of space behind them. I figured it was probably a chute for his dirty laundry. From the looks of the place, it wouldn't have surprised me in the least. Squinting through the dim light, my eyes caught something across the room. There was a door on the far wall. It was old, made of wood that was splintering at the edges, like it had been petrified down there. The panels sagged unevenly, warped and streaked with mold. A thick black fungus clung to the base, traveling upward through the grain, like veins through flesh. Deep gouges marred the lower half, as if something hard and sharp had struck it repeatedly. It didn't take long for me to realize that this door might be the source of my salvation and my damnation. It couldn't have been but a couple of minutes before the sound of heavy footsteps thundered down the corridor. My eyes snapped back to the door as adrenaline-soaked panic tore through me, raising every hair on my skin. I couldn't see him yet, but I could feel him. A dark, foreboding presence pressed in closer with each echoing step. I barely had time to sit up before the door creaked open and he stepped into the room. My skin crawled the moment I saw him, his face still wearing that same sick, curling smile. His clothes were the same, ragged and stained, but his eyes were sharper now, bright with what looked like an eager anticipation, like he'd been waiting for this particular moment his entire life. His gaze slowly rolled over me, assessing his prize. Seemingly satisfied with what he saw, he spoke. "Good, you're awake," he said, his voice relaxed and calm, as if this were a completely normal conversation. "I was starting to worry you wouldn't wake up, but you seemed like a tough one. I figured you'd come around. You've got some fight in you, Emily. I like that in a woman." Hearing my name slide off his lips made me want to vomit. He had taken everything from me, including my name. I wanted to curse, fight, anything, but I couldn't. My mouth was so dry that it had tightened my throat, preventing my vocal cords from functioning. My chest felt shallow, my lungs still straining to pull in enough air to breathe properly. I could do nothing but glare at him, my words stuck somewhere between my mind and my mouth. "Don't bother struggling," he said, looking down at me like he could read my thoughts. "You're not going anywhere, not yet anyhow." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife, holding it up in front of me to make sure I saw it. My breath caught in my throat as he took a step closer. The dim light skimmed across the blade, sending a sharp pain through my head. It wasn't large, but he handled it with such casual ease that my whole body trembled in fear. He twirled it between his fingers effortlessly, like a familiar toy. I could feel the intensity grow in the room with every movement. "You see, Emily," he continued, his voice low and smooth, "I don't really like to hurt people, but when they don't listen, and especially when they're difficult, they need to be put back in line. Understand?" He stepped closer, then crouched down until his eyes were level with mine. My heart hammered in my chest as I instinctively pulled against the chains, trying to push myself as far away from him as I could get. "Please," I silently begged in my mind, "please no." I wanted to shout, but the words stayed locked inside me. I was completely trapped. His smile widened as he lowered the blade from my face. "I'm going to be kind to you. I promise I am," he said, staring into my eyes. "But you're going to need to learn. You're going to have to understand how things work around here." I flinched as he suddenly rose, his fingers grazing my cheek on the way up. It was the gentlest touch, but in my mind, it felt like a razor blade dragging across my skin. My body screamed to pull away, but I could barely move. He reached out and cupped my jaw, forcing my head to tilt upward. His face hovered inches from mine, so close that I could see every detail in his face. His skin, so sickly pale, looked as if it had been completely drained of all warmth. Thin, purple veins snaked across his temples and neck, pulsing subtly as if some alien fluid flowed through them. Worst of all, his cracked, colorless lips twisted upward into that same grotesque, misshapen smile, sending waves of nausea across my stomach. Though I badly wanted to, I dared not look away. I was frozen in terror, forced to stare into his soulless eyes. He pulled back slightly, grinning with amusement. "I don't hurt the ones who make it easy," he said softly, "but when they make it hard, well, that just makes it a little more fun for me." I felt my stomach twist as his words slithered around my mind like a parasite, digging in to feed on my fear. The knife in his hand caught the dim light, glinting sharply across my face, a cold, silent reminder of what would happen if I didn't obey. Suddenly, he lunged forward. I barely had time to register his movement before a hot, searing pain ripped across my cheek. The blade sank in, carving a line of fire through my skin. I could feel the warm blood beginning to flow across my cheek in thick, sticky rivulets, slowly rolling down my neck and onto my shirt. I gasped, my eyes wide in shock. He was just there, the blade slicing through my skin so fast, so effortlessly that I couldn't have stopped it if I wanted to. Blood pooled in my mouth, thick and metallic as it flowed down my face. I summoned everything within me to keep from gagging, fighting to stay calm and bury the pain. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Smiling widely, he stepped back to admire his handiwork. "See, that wasn't so bad, was it?" he asked sarcastically. "It's just a little cut. It'll heal. In a few days, you won't even remember it." He was right. The sharp, throbbing pain in my cheek was already fatting beneath something far worse. The creeping realization that this was only the beginning settled heavily in my mind. If this was not so bad, I couldn't begin to imagine what he would do to someone who made it difficult. "Now," he said, looking down at the blood on his fingers, "let's see how long it takes for you to learn." He casually pulled out a white handkerchief from his pocket and began wiping my blood from his blade and hands before tucking it away again. I wanted to scream or to fight, but I couldn't. It wouldn't do any good anyway. The chains were too tight, and my body was already trembling too hard to be of any use to me. Sheer and absolute terror rooted me in place. "Please," I whispered, my voice crackling and weak, "please don't do this to me." He stood there motionless, staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. For a moment, maybe a fraction of a second, I thought I saw something shift behind them. I noticed the slightest flicker of humanity spark within him, but just as quickly as it had shone, it vanished, swallowed by the vast, empty darkness he had become. "I'm going to take good care of you, Emily," he said, his voice soft once again. "You just need to learn your place and it will all be fine." It sounded gentle, but I could hear the darkness behind it, the threat buried underneath. I now knew what he was capable of. I'd seen the way his eyes darkened the moment the knife appeared. I saw the way he looked at me, not like a person but like a thing, something to be broken, twisted, owned. I eventually lost track of time. It could have been days or maybe weeks. I stopped counting early on. I used hunger to keep my mind off the time. It relentlessly gnawed at me. My body begged for food or water, or literally anything to remind me that I was still alive. The man, whose name I still didn't know, came in and out sporadically, never staying for too long but always keeping an eye on me. When he chose to speak, it was always deliberate. Every word was cryptic and measured. His voice slid along the walls, quiet and cold, sinking into the back of my mind. "I'm just making you into something better." He repeated again and again, as though repetition could absolve him, or convince himself the lie was no less monstrous than the truth. As much as he said it, I could never understand what it meant. Better how? Better for what? What did he even mean by that? When he first bound me in the chains, I convinced myself that it was just a temporary thing. He couldn't keep me here forever, right? He had to let me go eventually. Or I thought maybe somebody would come looking for me, and at any minute they'd bust down the door and find me. At the very least, I figured that if he meant to kill me, he would have done it long before now. That gave me hope, albeit very little. As the days passed, the old wooden door opened less frequently. It felt like I was being tested, like a rat in a cage being dared to break free. Every time I worked up the courage to scream or pound on the walls, the only response I'd get was a low, amused laugh. "Such a fighter. You remind me of someone," he'd say, almost fondly, but he never elaborated. He never said anything that suggested I would ever make it out of there. Each day brought some new form of psychological torture, but the nights were always the worst. I always knew when they began. The faint sound of the TV upstairs clicking off, followed by his heavy, uneven snoring seeping through the floorboards, signaled the end of another long day. After that, everything went still. That was when the thick, suffocating quiet settled in, and the isolation hit the hardest. In those moments, I felt more forgotten than ever. Though it contributed, the silence wasn't the only thing that terrified me. It was what I began to hear in that silence. Faint, little noises seemed to come from all around me. Soft scratches persisted into the night, followed by faint dragging sounds, like something sharp scraping against wood. At first I thought I was imagining it. I figured he had finally broken me and I had fully gone insane. But the longer I listened, the clearer they became. I realized the noises weren't coming from my head. They were coming from inside the walls. I didn't dare speak at first, afraid that he would hear me and punish me again. But eventually, the constant scraping wore me down. I couldn't take it any longer. I had to know what it was. "Who's there?" I whispered, listening closely for a response. There was no answer. Nothing but the same relentless noise persisted. Over the next few days, the scratching continued, steady and desperate, like someone was trying to claw their way toward me from the other side. The noises sparked my curiosity, but more importantly, they gave me a fragile sliver of hope. I thought that maybe something else was trapped in here, just like me, trying so desperately to escape. It gave me the courage I needed to push on. I had to know what was happening. I had to know what or who was behind that wall. It felt like an eternity before light crept under the door once more. It was him, but this time, there was something different in the way he moved. I could hear the faint clink of the keys as he made his way to the door, followed by the slow, deliberate turn of the lock. When he stepped inside, I noticed something I had never seen in him before. There was a wild gleam in his eyes, sharp with a sort of feverish hunger. "You're getting weaker," he said, standing over me, scanning me like a piece of meat. "It's time we had a real conversation." I wanted to speak, but my throat was dry, parched from nearly a full day without water. My body hung heavy against the chains, the metal biting into my wrists just enough to remind me that I was still alive. I was exhausted. He crouched down in front of me, bringing his face closer to mine until I could feel his breath against my skin. "You've been hearing things, haven't you?" he asked, grinning like a child. My gaze flicked toward the wall before I could stop it, trying to dismiss the question, but he caught it. He let out a low, satisfied chuckle. "Don't worry about them," he said, as if my fears were inconsequential. "They're like you, well, they were once, but they didn't learn their place." A shudder tore through me. Each one of his words landed like heavy punches against my skull. He raised his hand and brushed my hair back, his touch light and gentle, but I could feel the icy malevolence beneath it. His fingers lingered a little too long, too possessively. The contact slithered under my skin, making it twitch and crawl, desperate to tear itself away from his touch. "Now," he whispered, his breath warm and wet against my ear, "I'm going to let you in on a little secret, Emily." My heart skipped a beat. I felt like I knew exactly what he was going to say next, but I wasn't fully prepared for him to. "You're not the only one down here," he said, smiling ear to ear. "There are more, and let me tell you, they are very interested in you. You are all they've been able to talk about for the last few days." He chuckled, as if he were telling me some sarcastic joke, but I wasn't laughing. "Don't worry, you'll meet them soon enough," he continued. "I just need to make sure you're ready." I felt sick. I wanted to scream in his face, but my body was too weak. I began to shake violently as I finally managed to force out a few broken words. "No, please," I begged, trying to plead to the glimpse of humanity I had seen in him that first day. He smiled at the fear in my voice, then clicked his tongue. "Tesk, tesk, tesk, you'll understand soon. You'll all understand." He stood up abruptly and pivoted toward the door. He grabbed the old brass handle and pulled it open, quickly slipping back into the hallway. Before he fully closed the door, he turned back to look at me one last time, smiling wide as ever. "Don't worry, Emily," he said in a low, predatory rasp. "You'll be fine, just be good for me." With that, the door slammed shut, leaving me alone with the sounds of scratching still emanating from the walls. 3 days later, or what I thought was 3 days, I was losing track of everything. Days bled into one another, while hours seemed to pass like minutes. The hunger still gnawed at me, but it was no longer the worst thing. Now the waiting had become my greatest enemy. Dread hung in the air like static, gnawing at my senses. The feeling of something terrible lurking just out of sight remained ever present in my mind. It grew worse every time the door opened. I never knew who or what might appear. Most of the time it was him, but one day it was someone else. That morning was calmer than usual. I hadn't heard the usual commotion upstairs or in the hallway. I thought that he had finally grown tired of tormenting me and had left me to die. I was deep into my own self-pity when I heard footsteps approaching. I pressed myself against the wall, bracing for the worst. When the door finally opened, it wasn't his silhouette that filled the frame. It was a woman. She looked almost as pale as I felt. Her eyes were wide and frantic. Her hair was tangled and matted against her forehead as if she hadn't seen a shower in months. She looked like someone who had been here far too long. She stared at me with a desperate intensity, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. After an agonizingly awkward few seconds, she spoke. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. The words barely escaped her throat, as if speaking them cost her more strength than she had. I nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. I had no idea who she was or how long she'd been down here, but I could feel the bond instantly. There was this unspoken connection between us. We both shared an understanding of the horrors this place contained. I heard you before," she said, her voice a whisper. "The scratching, I thought, maybe it was you." I tried to answer back. My mind was fried. I had no idea what was going on. I could barely connect one thought to the next, but I knew this was not some strange coincidence. The scratching, the extended time he had left me alone, this strange woman in front of me, it was all connected in some weird way. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak. "What's going on here?" I asked nervously. "What's that sound in the walls?" She took a deep, shaky breath, glancing over her shoulder with a nervous pause, as if she expected him to appear at any moment. "Others," she whispered, "like us, except they didn't learn fast enough." I felt my stomach tighten. How long have you been here?" I asked, trying my best to remain quiet. Her eyes welled up with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "Too long, too fucking long," she said in a bitter tone. "I don't even know what month it is anymore." I wanted to ask her more. I wanted to know everything, but before I could speak another word, those familiar, heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Her face drained of color as she quickly ducked back into the hallway, yanking the door closed behind her. She hadn't gotten far before he had caught her in the hallway. I couldn't see it, but I could hear him scolding her. A barrage of curses and screams filled the room, thankfully muffled by the thickness of the wood and brick. After a few tense moments, the door creaked open again, and this time he was the one who stepped in. He didn't speak a word. He just stood there staring at me. After a while, he reached in and grabbed the door handle, never letting his eyes leave mine. A twisted smile slowly spread across his face as he pulled the door shut, leaving me alone once more. The days dragged on like years. Time became a cruel, meaningless construct, stretching and blurring until it was impossible to remember how long it had been since I last spoke to anyone. Even the memory of his voice had begun to fade, slipping away like everything else. He'd begun leaving me alone more often, but never in a way that felt like relief or mercy. Each day, the rusted doors next to me would screech open, revealing a dumbwaiter he'd built into the wall. Every morning, it shuddered to life, its wooden frame rattling as it crept downward from whatever hellscape lay above me. It always stopped short with a dull thud, shaking violently as the doors rattled. Inside, there would be a single bottle of water, sometimes only half full, along with a plate of scraps, seemingly from whatever he hadn't finished from his dinner the night prior. Once the contents were removed, the doors would close, and the wooden frame would jolt upward, swallowed by the shadows between the walls. The silence that followed mealtime was worse than his presence. Every slow groan of the house above me, every uneven drip from the ceiling, it all felt like the breath before a scream. My nerves stayed wound so tight that the only thing I could hear amongst the oppressive silence was the quick, desperate thumping of my heartbeat in my ears. The woman I'd met in the hallway was still there. I could hear her sometimes, her soft footsteps drifting through the corridors like something half alive, half forgotten, performing whatever menial tasks he had bound her to. I often wondered why she hadn't tried to escape. What was so special about her that he let her walk around unshackled? I didn't know it at the time, but I wouldn't have to wait long to get answers. I'd just woken up and once again settled into my little corner of hell for the day, praying that the man would forget about me, hoping he'd slip up and leave the door unlocked just once. To my dismay, the chains remained, the floor beneath me feeling more like a grave than a prison with each passing day. It had become much harder to remember who I was, or even who I used to be. The girl who could walk down the street without looking over her shoulder, who had a good life, full of happiness and freedom, was now just a thing to him. A broken doll, something he could project all of his dark fantasies onto. In the middle of my loathing and self-pity, I heard a series of knocks reverberating through the room. Each one was slow and deliberate, as if the person behind them wanted to make sure I heard and acknowledged them all. They were followed by a silence that seemed gentler, kinder than I was used to, like the last words you hear from your mother before drifting off to sleep. I had almost tricked myself into believing this would be something different, something better than what I had known it to be, but the belief quickly faded. The gentle caress of that thought was replaced by the same low chuckle that I knew so well, rising from behind the door. My heart dropped as I began fighting the urge to tremble in fear. He need not have spoken to strike fear into me at that point. I watched as his dark shadow appeared from behind the wooden door. "Time to play, Emily," he said as he stepped inside the room with me. I closed my eyes, trying to tame the silent storm raging within my head. His words stung, but there was no use in fighting. Not anymore. There was no way out of this. I had barely eaten anything over the last few days, and my body was growing weaker. I knew I would have to sit there and take it, or risk him hurting me even worse. I could feel the edges of my sanity slipping as he inched closer. I pulled together what mental strength I had left, readying myself for whatever he had planned. As he made his way toward me through the dim light, I could see that he wasn't alone this time. A woman was with him, the same one I had spoken to before. Her eyes were wide and frantic. She didn't even look at me as she stepped into the room behind him, choosing instead to stare at the walls around me. She was silent, not showing any outward emotion, but I could see it in her face. She was terrified. The closer they both got to me, the more violently her body shook, as if I were the source of her fear. "What's happening?" I whispered, barely able to speak above the lump in my throat. "What's going on?" He pushed the woman toward me, and she stumbled, falling to her knees before me. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked up at me. I could see that she was already covered in bruises, and her clothes were horribly torn and stained. Her face was gaunt, hollowed by exhaustion and fear. She didn't look like the same person I'd seen days before. "Emily," she rasped, her voice cracking. He's changing things. Things are different now. She cut herself off, her breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. The tears that she had been holding back started to flow down her cheeks, as if she were finally releasing the pain she'd been carrying for so long. I reached for her, desperate to know what was going on, desperate to help her, but she recoiled from my touch, fear exploding in her eyes. "No, no, don't touch me," she whispered frantically. "Please, you don't understand. Before she could finish, he took a step toward me and pressed his hand down on my shoulder. I felt his cold, hard grip squeezing tighter, setting the tone before he even said a word. Once he had satisfied his sick, twisted lust for control, he crouched down beside me. He spoke with a soft, almost gentle tone as he leaned in, his breath hot against my ear. "Well, now look what we have here," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "You've made a new friend, Emily. That's good. You'll need all the friends you can get for your next phase." His smooth, icy words melted across my mind, settling into panic. My heart pounded in my chest, flooding my body with adrenaline. I jerked my head away from him, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. "What are you talking about?" I asked, voice shaking. "Why are you doing this to us? Please just let us go." He laughed in a harsh, grating rasp, like fingernails scraping across a blackboard. "You don't understand," he said, his voice slipping into a near whisper. "You'll never understand. You don't know how it feels. How good it feels to break someone down to nothing, to make them beg, to make them need you." I flinched as his hand tightened further on my shoulder, his fingers digging deep into my skin. "Soon you'll get it, and when you do, you'll be just like her. You'll be begging me to help you, begging me to make you better. Oh, what a beautiful day that will be." He turned to the woman then, as though I were nothing more than a shadow in the room. "Take her to meet Lilith," he said coldly. "It's time for her next lesson." The woman didn't move at first. She just stared at the floor, hollow-eyed and empty, as if she were already somewhere far away, lost within herself. Then slowly she rose, unsteadily climbing to her feet, her body swaying from fatigue and stress. Her eyes remained fixed ahead, rigid and vacant, desperately avoiding my gaze. In that moment, I was torn between two things that scared me senseless. The first was her. She had been changed completely, which frightened me almost as much as he did. She wasn't just broken. She had been altered. I didn't even recognize her anymore. The second thing was what hit me the hardest, sinking deep into my consciousness like a needle. I could feel the unease growing as a strange, knowing certainty washed over me, telling me that whatever was coming next would not be as pleasant as the torment I'd already endured. This felt different. He'd had enough of trying to break me down. He was preparing me for something darker, something worse that I didn't understand yet, but could already feel reaching out for me. He reached down for my right hand, yanking it toward him until the chain rattled tight. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, silver key, and unlocked the shackle. My heart fluttered as it clattered to the floor. This was what I'd been waiting for. I knew this was my chance to get out of this place. The instant my wrist came free, I jerked my hand back and lunged at him, frantically swinging for anything I could hit, hoping it would hurt him enough for me to escape. He snapped backward and away from my fist before quickly raising his hand and bringing it crashing down across my face, snapping my head back against the wall. My body fell limp, and my vision briefly faded as the world spun around me. Through the haze, I rolled my head back around, catching his gaze by mistake. "See," he said calmly through gritted teeth, "this is why you need another lesson. You're just not ready yet." I barely felt him release the shackle on my other wrist before a sharp, mechanical sound clicked in my ear. I felt a cold sting close around my wrists as he fastened handcuffs in place of the shackles. Once he finished tightening the cuffs, he grabbed my chin and jerked my head upward, forcing me to look at him. He stared deep into my eyes, giving me one last, chilling smile before saying, "Enjoy your lesson, Emily." He stood up and walked out of the room without saying another word, the door clicking shut behind him. For a few seconds I just sat there, dizzy and disoriented, scrambling to make sense of what was going on. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I was running out of time. I heard the woman move, slowly shuffling toward me. Her hands trembled as she reached for me, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She didn't speak or even look me in the eyes as she stood me upright. My legs wobbled beneath me. I was dazed, weak, and broken, barely able to even stand on my own without her assistance. She steadied me in place and, without hesitation, gently pushed me forward. She held one hand against the small of my back and the other one clutching the chain on my handcuffs. She'd take a step and then pull me along behind her like a dog on a leash, each movement stiff and mechanical, as if she weren't even aware of what she was doing. I staggered along behind her, my body paralyzed with fear. We stepped into the hallway outside the room, and she led me toward a narrow door at the far end. When she opened it, a rush of cold air spilled out, carrying the scent of sweat and long-forgotten torment. Beyond the doorway lay a sub-basement that descended into what felt like some alien underworld. The stairs leading down were steep and uneven, each step groaning under our combined weight. The deeper we descended, the the worse everything felt. The corridor stretched into darkness, long and quiet like a predator closing in. Finally, we reached the bottom where another door stood. Before I could even examine it, the woman reached out and turned the handle. The door to the room opened with a loud groan, twisting my stomach into knots. As I was guided across the threshold, I scanned the space thoroughly, the truth hitting me almost immediately. This wasn't a room at all. It was a cage. The floor was made of slick, uneven concrete stained with remnants of something I couldn't identify. Chains and hooks jutted from the walls at odd angles, shadows pooling beneath them. A single dim light flickered overhead, casting the room in a sickening orange glow that barely reached the walls. Cold, blackened metal bars stretched from floor to ceiling, enclosing a space barely large enough for a single person. Inside the bars lay another woman, bloodied, bruised, naked, and curled up in a ball. She didn't move when we entered, but her eyes were wide open, staring into the blackness. They were empty, as if she had been stripped of her own soul. I could feel her despair radiating from her. "Go ahead," the woman said to me, her voice distant. "He says you have to meet her, and then you'll be ready." "Meet her," I whispered, hoping the woman behind the bars couldn't hear me. I took a step back, but the woman behind me grabbed the chain on the cuffs and forced me forward. "He says you have to know. You have to know what happens when you don't learn quickly enough. He just wants you to obey." The woman's voice trembled. I could feel her hands shaking through the metal of the handcuffs. "Please, don't make the same mistake I did." The cage creaked as the woman inside it shifted. She looked up at me with blank eyes, her expression unreadable, like a shell of a person who'd once been. "Please," I whispered, choking on the words. "Please don't put me in there." She didn't answer. She just kept pulling me toward the cage, following her orders. That's when it all hit me. I finally accepted the truth that I had tried so hard to deny. She was never going to help me. She was just another victim, another piece of his twisted puzzle, and I was just one more name on the list of broken people who would learn the hard way. I never truly understood how heavy silence could feel until that moment, standing in the doorway. I felt like a piece of trash he'd finally decided to toss out. "We need to go in," the woman guiding me murmured. "You have to." Her tone wasn't obedient. It was resigned and defeated. She didn't sound like someone following orders out of fear, but like someone who believed she no longer had the right to choose anymore. My chest tightened. "Please," I whispered, "I don't want to." "What you want doesn't matter," she quickly snapped back. "Not anymore anyway." Her words didn't feel like a reprimand, but just a plain fact. She was only repeating what she knew. It seemed that was all she had left. When we reached the cage, she paused briefly. Her eyes closed as she drew in a steady breath. Then, without warning, she snapped her head toward me, fixing her gaze on mine as she pushed me closer to the bars. Her voice was barely louder than the buzzing bulb overhead, but she made sure I could hear every word as she leaned closer. "Don't speak. If he hears you, he will hurt all of us," she said plainly. My skin crawled. "Why?" I asked without thinking. "SHH," she hissed in return. Her voice fell silent as she pulled a key from her apron and began unlocking the cage door. She opened it slowly, the latch clicking with a metallic snap that echoed off the walls. The woman inside pushed herself up from the floor to look at me. Her gaze released the dread I'd been holding back at the edges of my mind, allowing it to surge forward and swallow me whole. Up close, I could now look into her eyes. They were empty, but not lifeless, as if everything that made her a person had been stripped away, leaving the frail, naked thing in front of me in its place. She blinked slowly, a faint twitch rippling across her cheek. "You need to kneel," the woman behind me said. "What, why?" I asked, confused. "Kneel," she repeated, a sharp panic edging into her voice. She jerked the cuffs hard enough to send me stumbling forward. I fell, catching myself with my hands on the concrete. Pain shot through my palms, but it barely registered. The caged woman had started moving as I hit the ground, crawling toward me with an unnatural sort of grace. Her motions were careful and deliberate, the precision clearly practiced, like she had learned exactly how to move to avoid punishment. "Don't touch her," the woman behind me whispered, her voice shaky. "Not yet. She reacts violently to touch." I dropped my gaze to the floor to avoid eye contact. I didn't even want to look at her. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard that I worried she would hear it. She crawled closer. I could hear the scrape of her rough, calloused knees dragging across the concrete as she inched to within a foot of me. I braced myself, though I didn't know why or for what. She was a prisoner like me. Just when it felt like the tension in the room had reached its breaking point, a small, fragile voice crept into my ears. "Emily." My blood froze. The woman's voice was soft and jagged at the same time, like a rasp from a throat that had forgotten how to form words. But it was my name. How could she possibly know who I was? Hearing it from her felt like someone had slipped a thin blade between my ribs and twisted it, hollowing out my chest with an instant mix of guilt and sorrow. The woman behind me, the one guiding me, flinched violently, as though the sound of the caged woman's voice physically hurt her. "Don't respond," she hissed. "Do not let him hear your voice." My lungs tightened, but how does she know my? "Quiet," she cut in. She pulled the chain again, forcing me closer to the other woman. My knees pressed against the cold concrete as she lifted her trembling hand and began threading her fingers through my greasy, unkempt hair. She smelled like sweat and something damp, something faintly sour. I don't know how, but I could smell the fear and torment emanating from her. Her fingers slid across my scalp like she was studying me, sending jolts through my body. It wasn't pain or fear, but something that made me feel worse. It felt like recognition, as if this were always meant to happen. Her mouth opened slightly, the corners twitching as if something inside her was trying to get out. That same rasping voice came leaking out, this time no longer soft or timid. "Don't let him name you," she said flatly. I didn't even have time to process her words before the woman behind me snapped back at her. "Damn it, not yet. You can't tell her yet. If he knows you told her, he's going to hurt you again. You know that." There was a tremor in her voice, not because of the woman in the cage, but because of what she was saying. I was never meant to know the truth. The woman blinked again. Her eyes shifted past me, locking onto the one gripping my cuffs. She gave a slight tilt of her head, subtle but questioning. "It's not time, not here. If he hears us, then he'll." She cut herself off abruptly, her voice strangled by something she couldn't bring herself to say. She leaned away from us, shifting uncomfortably behind me. The tension in the air thickened, stretching a heavy silence between us. I swallowed hard. "Please," I whispered, "tell me what." Before I could finish, a hand shot out from behind me, clamping over my mouth. The woman's cold, shaking fingers pressed against my lips with enough pressure to bruise. "Don't talk," she said sharply. "If he comes in and hears your voice, you won't leave this room the same. Understand?" Tears stung my eyes as I nodded, terrified to even move. "Good." She let up on her grip slightly, testing whether I truly understood. "What does that mean?" I tried to ask, but it came out muffled against her palm. She removed her hand and exhaled a deep, exasperated breath as she pulled away from me. "It means there are versions of us," she said quietly. "Stages. He breaks us down until we stop fighting and stop thinking, until you can't recognize the difference between obedience and survival anymore." Her voice caught in her throat for a moment. "At the final stage, he names you. That's when he truly owns you. That's when you know you will never leave this place. Your old self dies, leaving behind what you see in front of you there, a shriveled husk." Every part of me went cold. The caged woman's fingertips slid off my scalp, retreating to the floor in front of her. The woman behind me leaned closer, loosening her grip on the handcuffs. She crouched down next to my ear, her voice morphing into a fragile whisper. He only uses your real name at first, when you're fresh. That's the beginning of his process. Once you let him call you by it willingly, well, then everything else becomes easier for him to take. The caged woman nodded weakly, her breath rattling in her chest. He will take everything from you, she added. I was so lost and confused. My mind couldn't comprehend what they were telling me, but I was determined to find out what it all meant. What does he do when you reach the final stage? I whispered, turning back to look at the woman behind me. She hesitated, tightening her jaw until her teeth scraped together. Pain flickered across her expression like she was reliving a horrific memory. When he names you, she said slowly, you stop being who you were. He cuts away everything that resists him, every thought that questions him, every instinct that rebels. He remolds you into what he wants. My stomach churned. You mean he's brainwashing women? I breathed. Her eyes snapped to mine. No, brainwashing changes your mind. This changes your identity, your soul. He digs into you like he's carving a gourd, scraping out what made you whole until there is nothing left. I swallowed hard, trying to contain the fear building within me. What stage are you? I asked. She looked away, clearly trying to hold back a waterfall of tears. I'm at the stage where I don't try anymore, she answered. There's no point in it. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they also made sense in my mind. She was the only other person I had ever seen who wasn't chained up or in a cage. Is that why you can walk around freely? I whispered. Because he trusts you. She drew in a shuddering breath as tears fell from her eyes. No, she responded. He broke me. I'd rather die in here than feel his hands on my skin again. She looked down at the floor, letting the tears drip across the concrete. Maybe one day I'll find the courage to do it. Absolute silence settled over the room, devoid of any comfort. Aside from the three of us, only the cold, hard walls heard her cries. After a long pause, she lifted her head, wiping the tears from her face as she spoke again. He calls me Mara. Her voice trembled on the name, tinged with both shame and resignation. That's not my real name, she added quickly, almost defensively. But it's what he named me, so it's who I am now. I stared at her, my heart pounding so violently I thought my ribs might crack. What's your real name? I asked gently, trying not to disturb her any more than I had to. Mara's eyes darted toward the door, as if she expected him to appear there at any second. It doesn't matter, she whispered. He took it, it's his now. The woman in the cage rasped something under her breath. Mara turned her head slightly, listening intently to what she was trying to say. The woman repeated the soft, broken words over and over. She needs to know, Mara. Mara swallowed hard. If I tell her, he'll find out and punish us both. How? I asked. She didn't answer, but the caged woman spoke up, this time slower, making sure I could hear her clearly. You didn't choose to learn. He will hurt you until you do. It seemed like every word took more and more strength out of her. Mara's face twisted with guilt as she listened to the woman speak. She looked back at me and whispered, "Her name is Lilith." A cold shiver ran through me as the pieces finally clicked into place. The cruel reality settled over my mind like a suffocating weight. I would most likely become just like them, reduced to nothing but a hollow existence of involuntary servitude for a monster. She was like you once, Mara said softly, new, terrified, fighting every second. Her voice wavered. She lasted the longest of any of us before she stopped trying. A single tear slid down Lilith's cheek. She stopped fighting when he named her. Lilith let out a weak, broken sob, exhaling like she had torn something loose inside her. Don't answer him, Emily, she breathed, body convulsing in fear and pain. Her arms contorted, and her back twisted as a violent tremor seized her body. A strangled cry rippled from her throat, echoing sharply off the concrete and steel. Mara grabbed me, yanking me backward so fast the cuffs bit into my wrists, feeling like they would break. "He's coming," she hissed in my ear. "What? How do you?" I stammered, barely processing her words. "Be quiet," she snapped. Her fingers tightened painfully around my arms as she held me back. The basement doorknob groaned, the sound of scraping metal slicing the silence. Mara went rigid, her head snapping to the door, eyes wide and hollow with terror. The door creaked as the lock clicked open, sending a shockwave of sound through the room. Panic twisted in her features as she shoved me back, away from Lilith's writhing body. I stumbled, landing on my knees as she forced me down, pressing me into the cold floor. "Emily," she whispered urgently, pushing her forehead against mine. "Listen to me. This is important." Her voice shook with a mix of fear and desperation. "When he comes in, he will say your name." Her nails dug into my skin as her breathing got faster. "You must not respond, understand?" "Why? What happens if I—" "He will think you're ready," she cut me off, her voice lower than a whisper. The latch clicked softly, and the door began to open. Mara's breath caught in her throat as she pressed her forehead to mine harder, panic blazing in her eyes. "You are not ready," she whispered desperately. "Please, don't let him start on you. Don't let him take your name. Fight it as long as you can. Fight longer than I did, longer than Lilith did." The door swung fully open. Mara shoved my head down, forcing me to bow, her entire body collapsing into terrified obedience, as though she were a puppet whose strings had been cut. Then he stepped inside. His silhouette filled the doorway's glow, positioned perfectly so that he would only be seen how he wanted. Everything was done on his terms. He closed the door with a soft, careful click, then smiled, his expression warm, almost paternal, but entirely out of place. "Emily," he said, voice low, almost affectionate, "there you are." Mara bowed her head at once. Behind me, Lilith had gone completely still, the only sound in the room being the faint breathing from the four of us. The man took a slow step toward me. "Emily," he said again, "look at me." My heart pounded violently in my chest as I felt my body going almost completely numb with fear. Mara trembled beside me, and behind me I could hear Lilith whimpering softly. I remained silent, not moving, barely breathing, staring at the ground. I didn't dare look up at him. He crouched down in front of me, tilting his head, a strange tenderness overtaking him that made my stomach churn. "Emily," he repeated once more, slower this time, testing me. "Why won't you answer me?" I kept my mouth shut. After Mara's warning, there was no way in hell he was going to get me to speak. The man's smile widened, but I swore I could feel something shift beneath it. It wasn't anger or frustration. It was something more unsettling than that. It felt more like excitement or curiosity. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to a murmur. "Oh, good," he whispered. "You're not ready yet." There was no trace of kindness in his voice, no hint of malice, just a cold certainty of a promise he meant to keep. He straightened, brushing invisible dust from his hands, gesturing for Mara to rise. She obeyed without a word, her face falling back into that empty, vacant expression. Turning toward Lilith's cage, he spoke with casual indifference. "We'll continue her lesson tomorrow." She flinched violently at the sound of his voice, curling herself up tightly into a ball. She didn't acknowledge her movement as his attention was already on me again, his fingers stretching out toward my face. A primal fear clawed at my chest, and my body screamed to pull away, but Mara's grip tightened, a silent warning forcing me to stay still. He pushed 2 fingers beneath my chin, tilting my face upward until our eyes locked. "I don't think I'll name you just yet," he murmured, his voice soft but laced with malice. "You still think you're someone." His smile thinned, curling upward. "And I do so love the breaking in stage." With a final chuckle, he released my chin and turned toward the door. He motioned for Mara to follow him, and she obeyed instantly. "Come along," he said. "We have more work to do." Mara stepped toward the door, her face empty, devoid of emotion. Just before they stepped out, he paused, turning to look back at me, as if savoring the moment. "Good night, Emily," he said, his words sarcastically gentle. The door closed hard behind them, leaving the room steeped in a suffocating silence. From the darkness of Lilith's cage, her voice whispered, weak and strained. "Run, Emily, before he learns how to break you." I don't remember how long I sat in that wretched place, immobilized by fear and confusion, staring at the floor. Time seemed to collapse, every second becoming a weight, every breath a struggle. My mind was so jumbled, I could hardly form a coherent thought. The unrelenting silence and the cold beneath me were all I knew. I couldn't bring myself to move, knowing that if I did, something bad would happen to me or to one of the others. I dared not break the fragile balance of whatever dark force held this place. Lilith wasn't looking too good. Her condition was rapidly deteriorating, making communication almost impossible. She could hardly speak or move. Now and then, I'd hear her let out a soft groan, her voice barely understandable. Water, I need water." I did what I could, sharing what little water I had left with her. I thought I was helping, but in truth, I was only prolonging her suffering and allowing him to continue playing his sick game. All she wanted was mercy, and I couldn't give it to her. Watching her slip away, unable to do anything, was tearing me apart inside. The hunger, the pain, and the gnawing desperation all blurred together like a fevered dream, but the reality of it was far worse. I felt my mind slipping, being consumed by the weight of it all. The guilt prodded me constantly, the crushing sense that I was failing her, failing both of us. Every ragged breath she took felt like a silent prayer for an end to her suffering, and I could do nothing but watch. I knew I couldn't free her from this hell, and it broke me. My mind was fatting, circling the edge of sanity, when it was suddenly interrupted by a presence slowly emerging from the shadows. It was subtle at first, like a ghost wandering the corridors. Then I heard them. Soft, uneven footsteps dragging across the floorboards. They were familiar, almost comforting, ripping me out of my spiraling torment. The door creaked open slowly, and Mara stepped inside gently, still holding the same emotionless expression. She walked over, reaching a hand toward me. She lightly brushed her fingers against my arm, sending a jolt of warmth across my numb skin. Her touch wasn't comforting, but it was familiar, breaking the spell of paralysis that had kept me rooted to the floor. "Come on," she said, her voice quiet but insistent. "We have to go." I couldn't even respond. My body was sore and weak, and for a moment I didn't know if I could even speak anymore. She didn't wait for me to find my words. She knelt beside me and pulled my shoulder upward so that I could look at her. Her eyes were soft but firm, like anchors in a whirl of madness. She placed her hand gently on my back and gave me a little shake, just enough to snap me back to reality. I finally willed my body to move and pushed myself up to my feet. My legs felt like rubber beneath me, but she stayed close, a steady force to guide me through the open door. The hallway stretched out before me, longer than I remembered. It felt as though the walls were closing in, yet endless at the same time. Every step I took echoed off the walls, a steady drum of dread that ratcheted the tension even higher. The dim light pulsed overhead, casting shadows that danced on the warped wooden floor. The air was musty, thick with decay, as if the building were rotting beneath me as I walked. Yet something about the place still felt very much alive, as if it were watching me, aware of my presence. I glanced ahead, where Mara was already several steps in front of me, her movements eerily calm. She didn't seem affected by the atmosphere at all. She moved with determination and what I thought was grace, each step measured, as if she'd done it 1,000 times. Her confidence was unsettling, completely out of place in the crumbling world around us. I had no idea how she did it, but I couldn't take my eyes off of her, mesmerized by the way she seemed to command the space around her. Turning a corner, a door emerged down the hall. At first, it seemed like a silent invitation, but the closer we got, the more it felt like a trap, looming ahead like a hungry beast. Its battered frame gleamed unnaturally in the hallway light, as though it were alive, pulsing with an eager, baleful energy. "I'm not ready," I whispered, the words barely leaving my lips. "Ready or not, Emily," Mara said, her eyes locking onto mine. "He doesn't wait." Her words felt like a blade in my chest. He doesn't wait. That fact alone sat like a stone in my stomach. I knew hesitation wasn't an option. Not with him. Not here. We stopped in front of the door so that Mara could find the key. It didn't look like the others. It was painted matte black, unmarked like the rest. There was no handle, no keyhole, nothing that suggested a way in. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, flat metal disc. The disc was unremarkable at first glance. It looked like just a dull, worn piece of metal, but she held it with a kind of reverence. She stepped up to the door and pressed it against the surface, right in the center. Nothing happened at first, the air turning stale between us, as though the door itself was taking its time to respond. Then, with a metallic clank followed by the faint sound of something sliding, the door cracked open slightly. Mara applied more pressure to the disc, and with another faint mechanical whine, the door gave way. It didn't open like a normal door. Instead, it shifted inward like a bank vault, hiding things not meant to be seen. The door swung open smoothly, revealing an opening. The darkness swallowed everything, making it hard to see where the space began and ended. I couldn't see more than a foot inside. The air felt cold and stagnant, heavy with the scent of bleach and old iron, becoming sharp and sterile like an old hospital room the further we went inside. "This is stage 2, she said, voice low and grave, "where the real test begins, where he will show you your breaking point." As my eyes adjusted, I could see further into the space. It was like nothing I'd ever seen. The walls were crooked, twisted at strange angles, as if the architecture itself were trying to contain and confuse me. A low hum vibrated through the stone floor, through my bones and into my skull, burrowing deeper with every breath I took. It felt different. It felt alive. My heart raced as my hair stood on end. I couldn't focus. I wanted to look away, to scream, but my brain refused to cooperate. Every instinct gnawed at me to run, but I couldn't move. "This is," I began, Mara cutting me off. "SHH, don't talk, listen." The hum grew louder, twisting into something different, something worse. Whispers filled the room, voices barely audible in the darkness, reverberating across the walls and curling around me like smoke. They slithered into my mind, burrowing into my consciousness. "You hear them," Mara whispered, voice thin. "He feeds on them. He feeds on their fear and obedience. Using them when he wants, and then he leaves them here." She reached over and flicked a switch on the wall. Suddenly, hundreds of fluorescent lights buzzed above my head, flickering alive. The room stretched out before me, much further than I thought, now completely bathed in light. It was lined with rows of cages, but not like normal animal cages. These served a far more sinister purpose. Metal bars twisted and bent, some almost rusted through, others reinforced with chains to prevent escape or even movement. They were small, cramped little spaces, meant to hold humans. Inside the cages were dozens of women, all of them silent and hollow-eyed. Some sat, curled in on themselves, their bodies frail and hunched from days, maybe weeks of confinement. Others stood, their hands wrapped around the bars, eyes wide and empty, staring out into nothing. Their skin was pale and sickly, stretched thin over bone, like meat left out to rot. Some of them lay sprawled on the concrete, bound and wailing in pain. Their bodies told a heartbreaking tale. Some of them bore signs of profound violation. Swollen bellies stretched taut against filthy rags that barely clung to their emaciated frames, as if the weight of what had been forced inside them had physically become too much for them to bear. There was no joy in this, no hope. Only the unmistakable, brutal mark of ownership, the undeniable proof that what grew inside them had been created out of force and control. No longer an innocent life, but the echo of his cruelty on their ravaged bodies. I could see now, with chilling clarity, the depth of his evil. I took a step forward. My body carried me closer unconsciously, drawn to them before my mind could catch up. Their eyes flicked toward me, hollow and pleading, yet no words came. Their mouths were silent, but their eyes begged for something, anything to end their suffering misery. I stumbled back a step, feeling the bile rise in my throat. They weren't just prisoners. They were broken, only pieces of themselves, of their humanity. He had stripped away the rest, leaving behind nothing but a vessel, a symbol of his twisted control and domination. Mara stepped closer, brushing her hand against my arm. I felt the warmth of her touch, but it did nothing to calm the raw panic rising in me. "These are the ones who have been chosen," she murmured. "They all believed they could resist. They all believed they could survive, but they were wrong. He breaks you in ways he knows you can't fight. They're his now, and he wants you next." These women weren't just victims. They were warnings. Every one of them became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of what he was truly capable of. I couldn't let him do this to me. I wouldn't. I knew I had to hold on to survive. But the longer I stood there, the more I felt my resolve starting to crack. Seeing all those innocent lives bound and trapped, hearing their whispers, feeling their fear, it was all starting to get to me. I fell to my knees and began to sob, letting all of the built-up anger and pain flow out of me. I had stayed strong for so long until now. I had never felt weaker, more insignificant, more guilty. "Focus, Emily," Mara said sharply, pulling me back. "This is where the real test begins. Do you understand? You either break or you fight. There's no middle ground here." I nodded, my throat tight, the words stuck somewhere deep inside me. My knees ached against the hard floor, my shoulders shaking as the sobs came in waves, raw and uncontrollable, pulled from a place that I didn't even know existed. But in the pit of my stomach, a flicker of something burned. Beneath the grief, something shifted. A blinding rage rose from deep within me, burning into my chest and bringing with it strength and defiance. The sorrow didn't disappear. It was hardened, sharpened into a weapon I could use. Slowly, I pushed myself upright, rising from the floor as the anger filled my limbs with newfound strength. I stood tall, breathing unsteadily but resolutely. I wouldn't let him do this to me. Mara's gaze lingered on me for a moment, studying me, weighing my resolve. Then she turned and began walking toward the next row of cages. "You'll see," she murmured. "He's always watching, always waiting." I didn't want to follow. I didn't want to look at them anymore. Every face, every empty stare, every trembling breath felt like fingers wrapping around my heart, squeezing until I could barely move. But the newfound spark inside me, that small, stubborn, growing flame, refused to let me turn away. Not now. Not knowing that they were all still trapped here. Not when they needed someone to fight for them. I had to survive not just for me, but for them. The hum of the fluorescent lights behind me receded as Mara guided me through the twisted maze of cages. Each step hammered into me the brutal reminder of what would happen to me if I failed, and the weight of what I needed to do settled firmly across my shoulders. Passing them, the air changed, smelling of rot and despair, thick enough to taste. The women didn't flinch. They were shadows of themselves, hollow shells whose eyes begged for help, but whose mouths could not. I felt rage coil inside me, tighter than the marks that still burned my wrists. It became fuel for me. I would not be them. I would not let him name me. I would not end up in a cage. Mara led me toward a stairwell at the end of the corridor, past all of the cages. It was narrow and unstable, with peeling paint and wood warped by age. She stepped up on the first step, stopping for me to follow. Before I could climb up, she reached for my wrists, fumbling with something in her pockets. "Hold still," she murmured, pulling the handcuff key out of her apron. She wrapped her fingers around my wrist and slipped the key into the hole. A click echoed faintly in the hallway as the burdensome metal restraints dropped away from my skin, leaving deep red impressions behind. I stared at her, stunned. I hadn't expected mercy. I had given up on it. She met my eyes, her expression remaining blank. "You'll need your hands free for this." I opened my mouth, unsure what to say, but she spoke again, her voice low and fierce. "Listen to me, Emily. Whatever he tells you or does to you, whatever he makes you feel, it isn't real unless you let it be, understand? He only wins if you break." She paused, searching my face. "Don't break, Emily." She took a step back, tightening her jaw as the emotions welled up inside her. "This goes up," she whispered, almost reverent. "He doesn't expect anyone to reach it. The others never try." I hesitated. "Up there," I swallowed hard. "You mean to him?" Her gaze dropped, haunted and unreadable. "Yes, but don't expect me to help you beyond this." She hesitated just long enough for me to see her stoic expression fracture. "I can't, not anymore. He has hollowed me out, carving pieces away until there was nothing left. I can walk this place freely, but I can't change anything. I'm like a ghost, bound to this place. You'll have to do this on your own." Her words sent a stinging chill up my spine. I could feel her pain as if it were my own. I clenched my fists, tasting the metallic tang of fear on my tongue, coupled with fire burning hot within me. I followed her up the stairs, the steps groaning under our weight. Each creak rang out loudly, exploding through the silence, but we remained undetected. When we reached the top of the stairs, Mara grabbed my shoulder and slid a finger over her lips. We had come too far to get caught now. We had to remain silent. The upper floor hallway was completely different from everything else. It was sterile and pristine, a new addition by the looks of it. The air reeked with a sick cocktail of antiseptic and decay. Ahead of us sat a single door at the far end of the hall. As we approached it, I felt him. The weight of his dark, malicious presence. A cold, familiar certainty that had haunted me since the first time I heard him say my name. Mara stopped at the threshold. Her hand hovered over the handle as if touching it would burn her. "This is it," she said softly. "Once you go in, there's no turning back." I nodded. I didn't need her permission. I'd waited too long and suffered too much. She stepped back, her face slipping back into neutrality. "Finish this, Emily," she said, as she pulled the door shut, disappearing back into the hell that awaited her downstairs. I slipped further inside. The room was enormous, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight through a tall window. Shadows stretched across the wooden floor like long, crooked fingers. At first, everything was quiet, almost too quiet. My own breathing sounded like a powered vacuum in my ears compared to the silence. My footsteps echoed in the giant room, even though I was stepping carefully, trying to remain quiet. I made my way across the room, turning a corner to reveal the entire upper level. Hallways and rooms stretched in each direction, some doors hanging crooked on their hinges, others closed tight as if hiding something behind them. Dust floated in the thin slivers of moonlight, twisting like tiny ghosts along the draft. The air was thick and stale, carrying the musty smell of sweat and decay through the halls. The place looked abandoned. It was clear nothing here had been cleaned or touched by human hands in months or years. I continued to move cautiously, senses straining, every shadow appearing as a possible threat. I peeked into a room on the left. It was a bedroom, but just barely. The mattress lay directly on the floor, stained dark, sheets clinging to it like decaying skin that had begun sloughing away. Crumpled clothing and greasy remnants of takeout containers littered the corners, mold crawling over everything it could reach. There was a mirror opposite the bed smeared with fingerprints and small, frantic scratches as if someone had been clawing at it, desperately trying to escape their reflection. I stumbled back, bile bubbling up in my throat, but I forced myself to continue. Down the hall, I found what must have been his living space. A dilapidated couch sagged in the center of the room, stuffing spilling out like entrails. A flickering TV hummed in static, dragging back memories of my first days here. Tables were stacked with notebooks, pages scrawled in frantic handwriting, listing dozens of women's names. My stomach churned at the sight, but I forced my legs forward. At the far end of the hall, a door stood slightly ajar, a faint light spilling from it. I paused, taking a deep, steady breath, and pushed it open. And there he was. He sat behind a desk, casual, almost paternal in his posture, as if the basement levels and the horrors they held never existed. His hair clung to his scalp in oily mats, his skin still ghostly white, glistening with sweat. His fingernails were cracked, coated in black grime. Every crease of him seemed steeped in filth. His stench hit me, even from across the room, a nauseating mix of rot and something sour, nearly knocking me off my feet. My blood ran cold as he looked up from his notebook, a smile spreading across his face that promised pain without hesitation. "Emily," he said softly, almost delighted, "I wondered how long it would take you." I felt Mara's presence behind me, her shadow stretching along the wall. She didn't move forward right away, remaining loyal in ways I still couldn't understand. My hands trembled. Panic clawed at my mind, threatening to tear everything apart, but then I felt the floorboards creak beneath me. Mara had snuck up right behind me, using my silhouette in the doorway to hide her movement from his view. I felt her push something hard and cold onto my palm. An urgent whisper slid into my ear, cutting through the tension and snapping me back to reality. "Finish it." I looked down to see a jagged kitchen knife gleaming faintly in the moonlight. I swallowed hard, gripping it until my knuckles turned white. Fear still rattled in my chest, but my focus sharpened. I couldn't back out now. I had prepared myself for this moment. He rose, gliding toward me with that same calm, unnatural grace. "You still think you're someone, huh?" he asked, chuckling lightly. "I am," I whispered, voice trembling but firm as I raised the knife. "And I am going to kill you." He laughed even louder, making the hair on my neck stand on end. "Bold, I like that, but you're all alone, you ca." I lunged without hesitation, cutting him off mid-sentence. The knife plunged into his side before he could react fully. His eyes widened, and for the first time I saw shock and pain flicker through them. It made me almost dizzy with its unfamiliarity. He stumbled back, clutching the wound, deep red blood spreading across his filth-covered shirt, soaking into every inch. Rage twisted his features, warping him into something different now that he was stripped of his false civility. He lunged for me, unnaturally fast despite the wound. Adrenaline shot through me as the knife's cold weight settled back into my hand. Mara's words echoed in my ears, faint but clear. "Finish it." My grip tightened around the handle, the blood-slick steel grounding me. I drew a quick breath, letting the fear sharpen my senses, ready for whatever he brought next. He came across the table, swiping at me wildly and snarling in pain. His blood-soaked shirt dragged on the edge of the table, yanking him back, his fingers barely scraping past my arms as I sidestepped him. I lunged back at him, swinging blindly. The jagged blade tore into his side, sinking deep between his ribs. His voice exploded into a deep, guttural scream that ripped across the room. Blood poured from the wound, spraying across the table and my arms. I could feel the putrid, sticky substance clinging to my skin, a violent, wet reminder of how easy life can be taken. He pressed his hands to his wounds, blood seeping through his fingers as he steadied himself on his feet. His eyes locked on me, feral and full of hate. He screamed, then lunged at me again. I jerked aside, driving the knife into his shoulder as his momentum took him past me. Pain, shock, and disbelief flickered across his face, emotions I never thought I'd see in him. He stumbled, crashing into a wooden chair, sending notebooks and papers flying into the air, smeared in dark red. He rolled over amid the debris to face me, coughing as he tried to haul himself upright. "You think you can stop this?" he hissed, voice wet, choking down the blood in his throat. "You've done nothing. They're already broken beyond repair." I stared at him, the fire in my chest coiling, sharp and merciless. Words were no longer necessary. I'd seen and heard enough. I wouldn't let him steal another breath, another piece from me. I slashed again and again, each strike fueled by months of fear, by the hollowed eyes of the women in cages, by every tear Mara and Lilith shed on the cold floor. He collapsed to the floor, thrashing violently, gurgling curses that ended in wet, rattling gasps. His body rebelled against him, limbs jerking uselessly as each labored breath refused to come cleanly. The cold, untouchable certainty in his eyes cracked and crumbled away, revealing raw, unbridled fear in its place. He had become more animal than man, the source of fear and torment for so many, now a writhing, bloody mass on the wooden floor. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth as he tried to speak, barely dragging in air, yet no words came. Whatever he meant to say was never fully formed, wheezing and garbled words masking it. His fingers twitched weakly at my feet, as if I might save him. I stepped back. I didn't want to hear any more. I heard Mara move behind me, almost undetectable like a ghost. She paused, sweeping her eyes over him, taking in the carnage at her feet. The man who had tormented her body and mind for so many years lay there wheezing his final breaths. Her gaze lingered, unflinching. I could see the weight she carried in the set of her shoulders, the painful echo of years spent in chains and fear, forced to a life of twisted servitude. She didn't speak immediately. When she did, her voice was rough and strained, as if she hadn't spoken in months. "Years," she murmured. "Years I've been here too long. I've felt him in every breath, every second of every day. He changed me, hurt me, but I'm still here." Her eyes flicked up to me. "We're still here." She moved toward the desk, cold determination filling every step. Her fingers shook as she grabbed the keyring off his desk, keys that had locked countless women away to be used and forgotten. She held them for a moment, almost reverently, then shoved them into my hand. "Go," she said sternly, "free them." I didn't hesitate. I tore through the corridors until the basement door was finally in sight. The stairwell yawned before me, the darkness below threatening. The screams flooded me the moment I turned the handle on the basement door, a tidal wave of sound, raw and overwhelming. Women stumbled forward, some frozen, some crawling, some screaming their names at me, as if saying them aloud could pull them back into their old life before the cages, before he got to them. The keys rattled in my trembling hands as I flew from cage to cage. The locks clattered on the concrete, some fused to flesh, some rusted and half hanging on. Tears fell freely as chains fell from thin, bruised wrists and ankles. I ripped their restraints free, forcing their bodies upright. Some fell under their own weight, while others scratched and screamed for salvation. I gathered as many as I could, those who would let me help them, to guide them out of that horrid place. The basement itself seemed alive, shaking in anger at our defiance and lust for freedom. We moved slowly, each step a battle, each breath harder than the last. The passages and corridors seemed alien to some, but for others it seemed as though they had mapped the entire place in their minds, almost leading ahead of me. Mara had descended the stairs back to the basement. She lingered at the back of the corridor, her pale, tear-streaked face framed by the shadows and flickering light. She watched us as we pushed our way out, silent, unmoving, her hands still trembling from the years of torment, but her eyes fixed on the freedom spilling through the halls. She didn't follow. This place had taken too much from her to let her survive the light above. I gave her a last, desperate glance, pleading with her to follow. All she gave me was a smile. She didn't owe me anything. She had handed me the keys, and that was enough. That was all that mattered now. I guided them upward, moving through the chaos of stumbling bodies, pulling and urging them to keep moving. I held hands, lifted bodies, cut through cords, whispered encouragement. The weight of years underground, of hunger, filth, and fear, fell away in bursts of pain and laughter as we finally reached the entrance door. With a few shoves, the latch came free, opening into the cold night, air sharp in our lungs, stars burning bright overhead. Some of them clung to me, sobbing and shaking. Others screamed in shock at the sensation of fresh air on their skin, light in their eyes. Several women screamed the moment they crossed the threshold, collapsing to the ground as if the air in their lungs was too much to handle. A few shielded their eyes, whimpering, as if the darkness above might cave in on them the way it always had before. Grass crunched beneath their bare feet. Some of them dropped to their knees, clawing at it with shaking hands, fingers digging into soil, making sure it was all real. One woman pressed her face into the ground and laughed hysterically, the sound breaking apart, quickly transforming into violent sobs. "I can feel it," she whispered over and over. "I can feel the ground." None of us knew where we were, but we knew that we were no longer in cages. That's what mattered. The house loomed behind us, its massive, dilapidated frame standing out against the night sky like a monument of rot and despair. The windows stared blankly into the dark, following us like cold, dead eyes as we fled. We ran across the yard, expecting lights, street lamps, a road, anything, but there was nothing there. There were no neighboring houses, nor a road leading away. There were only trees. Endless trees swallowed the edges of the property, their twisted branches creaking softly in the night wind as they closed in around us. Even now, knowing that we were free, the feeling of pure isolation struck hard. Panic rippled through the group as the reality of it set in. "Where are we?" one woman cried. "Is this still part of it?" another whispered, terror seeping back into her voice. "I can't go back," one woman screamed suddenly, scrambling to her feet and spinning wildly in circles. "I won't go back, I won't, I won't." "Hey," I said sharply, grabbing her shoulders before she could run. She flinched violently at my touch, eyes wild, pupils blown wide. I loosened my grip immediately once I saw the pure terror sink back into her face. "Hey, listen to me. You're outside, you're free, he can't hurt you anymore." She didn't seem to hear me as she just stared at my mouth, watching the words come out as if she had lost all understanding of them. That's when I began to realize just how deep the damage truly went. Some of them no longer knew how to exist without commands or abuse. They had been told when to sleep, when to eat, and even when to suffer. Freedom wasn't relief. It was confusion. It became the same terror but without cage walls. "Stay together," I said louder now. "Please, everyone stay together." Keeping 27 tortured women in one group together was much easier said than done. One woman tried to run toward the trees before collapsing from exhaustion. Another had backtracked and curled herself into a ball near the porch steps, rocking back and forth, whispering a name I doubted anyone had heard in years. A few clung to each other desperately, arms locked so tightly their knuckles turned white. I knew I needed to do something soon, or this would have all been for nothing. We were out of our cages, now surrounded by nothing but dark, cold forest, which I knew could be just as cruel as the cages had been. My hands shook as I plunged them into my pockets, checking to see if I had grabbed anything in the midst of our jailbreak. I dug deep but found nothing. We had no phone, no watch, no idea what time it was or even what year for that matter. We were free but completely lost. The house stood on a massive stretch of land, deliberately isolated. He had planned it this way, for all of our screams to go unheard, and for no one to stumble across this place by accident. We could scream until our throats bled, and no one would come. Suddenly, through the trees, I saw movement. It was brief but unmistakable. It was a pair of headlights. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but soon, a low hum drifted through the trees, distant but growing louder by the second. Several women froze all at once, terror flashing across their faces. "No," someone whispered. "No, he's back." "It's not him," I said quickly, though my heart pounded violently in my chest. He's not." The headlights cut through the trees, blades of light slicing through the darkness. A car slowed near the edge of the property, tires crunching on gravel we hadn't noticed until now. Both doors opened, and two men stepped out, sweeping flashlights across the dark toward the house. I crouched down quickly, trying to make myself as small as possible, almost hoping they wouldn't see me. I was still so traumatized. "This is it," one of them said. "Wow, it's an even bigger shithole than how you described it," the other said back. They slowly approached us, talking amongst themselves about how they had heard stories about the house and how they were going to investigate and film for a YouTube video they were making. As they turned the corner into the massive yard, the leading man pointed his flashlight directly at me. "Holy shit," he yelled, jerking his body backward so hard that he almost fell. What is it?" the other one yelled in return. He scanned with his flashlights across the yard, revealing the dozens of barefoot and bloodied women Mara and I had dragged out, all wrapped in torn clothing and blankets, crying so hard that their bodies had begun shaking. He froze. "Oh my God," he breathed. I stumbled forward, hands raised instinctively, afraid sudden movement might send them running. "Please," I pleaded, voice breaking. "We need help, please." He took one look at his partner, but didn't hesitate after that. Their phones came out immediately. Their voices shook as they spoke, their words tumbling over each other in disbelief. There are women here, so many of them. They're all cut up, please hurry." One of the men stayed on the phone with the police, while the other walked up to me and handed me his jacket. Minutes later, the sound of sirens cut through the night, bringing a sense of relief and joy that I haven't been able to replicate since. Red and blue lights washed over the yard, flashing across hollow faces and shaking bodies. Some women screamed again, collapsing to the ground as the noise overwhelmed them. Others stared in stunned silence, mouths open wide, as if afraid this too would disappear if they reacted too strongly. The police officers almost didn't know how to react toward us. They moved carefully, slowly, like approaching injured animals, unpredictable and confused. They draped thick wool blankets over our shoulders, asking questions in gentle voices that most of the women either couldn't or wouldn't answer. Some had completely forgotten who they were or who they used to be. For others, time had fractured, the harsh reality of years having passed them by, leaving an indelible mark on them. This new reality was fragile. I watched one woman flinch violently when an officer reached out to help her stand. Another burst into tears because someone said her name aloud, not a number or a command, her real name. Not long after that, ambulances came, bringing with them more lights, more voices, and more unanswered questions. The police cordoned off the house, forcing its doors open and finally dragging its secrets into the light. I didn't want to watch. I couldn't. I stood barefoot in the grass, shaking uncontrollably, watching women be guided toward safety. Some had miscarried during the escape and had to be carried on stretchers to receive fluids and blood. Some were too injured to walk and were supported under each arm. And then some walked on their own, maintaining their fierce, stubborn resolve to the end. As I watched, I felt someone step beside me. It was Mara. She looked smaller outside, pale and fragile, like the house had been the only thing holding her upright all these years. She stared at the sky for a long time before taking a deep breath and looking over at me. "I forgot it was this big," she said quietly. I pushed air through my nose and nodded. I didn't know what to say to that. I couldn't imagine what she was feeling. I had only witnessed a glimpse of what she had been through, and yet it felt like an eternity. Eventually, the world began to make sense again, but only barely. They took us away, treated our wounds, and questioned us even more, the answers to which would never come out. They gave us food we could barely stomach in rooms full of light we could barely tolerate. We had survived for so long without these luxuries that having them now felt wrong. It all felt so foreign. Sleep didn't come easily, often coming in fractured pieces filled with waking nightmares and screaming. Shadows filled each corner, daring us to dream, daring us to remember. The scars didn't fade, they still haven't. In the days that followed, the story broke everywhere. The police had pieced his identity together quickly through property records, missing persons reports, and a trail of paperwork he'd been arrogant enough to leave behind. His face appeared on screens. His history unraveled across the news behind neat, steady anchors who knew nothing about who he truly was. I only saw the coverage once. When they said they were going to release his name, I turned away, lowering the volume to 0. I focused my gaze on the pattern of the carpet and tried to steady my ragged breathing. I couldn't afford to listen. Allowing myself to hear his name felt like I'd be giving him an invitation into my mind once again, as if speaking it aloud would let him reach through the screen and claim the space inside my head. I still didn't know if I actually killed him that night, but I wasn't going to allow him back into my head. Not again. I have to live with it, along with all the other women who endured this. We have to live with the days when silence grows too loud, when the world feels too close, or when every touch or common human interaction makes you flinch in fear. Those are the true scars we carry from this, but we live, and that's what matters. I carry what I did that night with me always. I can still feel the violence, the blood, and the surge of adrenaline I felt as we pushed through that door. I will never be the person I was before that man in that house. But I am still here. Because I chose to fight that night instead of just lying down and taking his punishment, dozens of women woke up to the sunlight on their faces this morning. Freedom isn't clean or gentle. It doesn't erase the actions you take or the blood you spill. But it is real, and sometimes real is as much as you can ask for.